Montana Territory. August 1883. The train hissed and groaned as it pulled into the dusty station at Dry Creek, its iron wheels screeching against the rails like it was reluctant to stop out here so far from anything soft or forgiving. Bridgette Albury stepped off onto the platform, her worn boots crunching against gravel. She clutched her carpet bag tightly, fingers white from holding it too long. Her bonnet shaded her pale face, but it could not hide the sharp disappointment in her eyes. She had traveled over 1,000 miles from Virginia to meet a man who had written that her honest face and good Christian values were just what he wanted in a wife. He had not even come to meet her. She waited for over an hour. The sun beat hard. The station master offered her a stool and a lukewarm cup of water. Men came and went, glancing her way, then quickly looking off. When the final wagon rolled away and the platform emptied, she finally asked, "Excuse me, sir," she said, voice steady. "Did Mr. Elwood Taylor send word?" The station master looked uncomfortable. "Miss, he came by this morning, said he saw your photograph and changed his mind." Bridgette's throat tightened. "Did he say why?" He hesitated. "Said you were too plain. Wanted someone with a bit more shine, I suppose." She did not cry, not here, not now. Instead, she nodded once, turned, and walked off the platform as if she had somewhere to go. She did not. She had sold her father's last tools to afford the train fare. She had no family left, no money. Just a letter that meant nothing now, and a sky so big it made her feel even smaller. She walked until her feet ached, until the grasses turned gold with the lowering sun. She sat near a fence post and tried to eat the last of her bread, but it stuck in her throat. A horse's hooves approached. She did not look up until the shadow of the rider fell across her. "Ma'am," she blinked up at the man on the chestnut gelding. He was tall, lean, and dusty. A rifle was slung across his saddle. His eyes, the color of a storm rolling in, studied her. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said, voice raw, "but I will be." He dismounted without another word and pulled a canteen from his saddlebag. "Here." She took it, drank, handed it back. "Thank you. You headed somewhere?" he asked. "I was not anymore." He looked at her a second longer, then extended a hand. "Name's Osias Zachary. I work a cattle ranch about 3 miles west. You don't look like you belong out here all alone." "I do not," she said. "I was meant to meet someone, a mail-order arrangement." He took one look at my picture and changed his mind. Osias's brow furrowed. "You came all this way and he just left you," she nodded. "Said I was too plain." He stared at her. "He is blind then, or stupid, maybe both." A flicker of warmth stirred in her chest. "You are kind to say so." He looked away, jaw tight. "It is not kindness. It is the truth." She did not know what to say to that. "I can take you to the ranch," he added. "We have a spare room in the bunkhouse. It is not much, but it is safe. Cook makes decent stew, and you can figure out your next steps from there." She hesitated. "I will sleep outside if it makes you feel better," he added quickly. "A woman should not be left out here, not alone." Bridgette stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "All right." He helped her into the saddle, then led the horse on foot, his hand steady on the reins. Neither of them spoke much on the way, but she watched the way he moved, quiet and certain, the way he looked toward the horizon like he was always expecting something to come from it. The Zachary Ranch was modest, 3 small buildings, a corral and open land that stretched into the hills. Bridgette was led to a clean cot in the spare room of the bunkhouse. True to his word, Osias slept outside that night, leaned up against a hay bale with his hat over his face. The next morning, she helped the cook peel potatoes. By the 3rd day, she mended a shirt with missing buttons. After a week, she was carrying eggs and feeding chickens like she had lived there her whole life. Osias came in from the fields each day dusty and sunburned, but he always nodded toward her and asked, "You all right?" And each time she answered, "Getting there." One afternoon, she was hanging laundry when she caught him watching her, not in a way that made her feel self-conscious, but like he was trying to figure her out. When she turned, he did not look away. "Something on my face?" she asked, half smiling. He stood there, hands in his pockets. "No, just thinking how wrong that man was." She frowned. "What man?" "The one who called you plain." He stepped closer. "You are the prettiest thing I have seen in a long time." Her breath caught. "You do not have to say that." "I know," he said. "I wanted to." She could not speak for a moment, her heart suddenly thudding hard in her chest. From that day, something shifted. He brought her early apples from the orchard. She patched the knee in his trousers and baked cornbread that made him smile like a boy. At dusk, they sat on the porch steps. Sometimes he spoke of his late father, who had built the ranch from nothing. Sometimes she told him about her mother's lullabies, the ones that sounded like soft wind through cotton. He never touched her, not once, but his eyes did not lie. 2 weeks after she arrived, she found him by the barn, hammering a loose hinge. She stood behind him, fingers twisting in her skirt. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe I could stay, work for my keep." He turned slow. "You do not have to earn your place here." "I want to." He set the hammer down. "Bridgette, I do not want you to stay because you have nowhere else. I want you to stay because you want to." With me, she stepped closer. "I do." His voice dropped. "You sure?" She nodded, eyes shining. "I want to stay with you." He reached for her then, one hand at her waist, the other brushing her cheek. She leaned into him without hesitation, and when he kissed her, it was not rushed or greedy. It was soft, real. Like something they had both been waiting for. Neither of them said the word love yet. But it was there, growing between them, steady as the land they stood on. The first frost came early that year, brushing the prairie grass with silver before the leaves had fully turned. Bridgette pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped out to the chicken yard, breath fogging in the morning air. The hens were restless, feathers puffed against the cold, and she worked quickly, fingers stiff as she scattered feed. Osias was already out by the north fence. She could just make out the shape of him on horseback, checking the new wire they'd strung 3 days past. His silhouette moved slow across the ridge, methodical, as if the land would shift beneath his boots if he hurried. Inside the main house, she'd been given the small bedroom off the kitchen. It had a narrow window and a pine chest where she kept her few things. Ruth, the cook, had given her a quilt with faded red stars stitched by hand. Bridgette had run her fingers over the seams the first night, not sure why it felt like comfort. She didn't see Osias again until late morning when he came in with dust on his coat and a scrape on his knuckle. "You're hurt," she said, nodding toward his hand. He glanced at it. Fence post slipped. "Caught me wrong. You'll need it cleaned." She reached for the basin on the stove, warmed from the fire. "Sit." He sat quiet while she dipped a cloth and pressed it gently to the cut. His hand was calloused, the skin warm beneath hers. He didn't flinch. "Do you ever think of leaving this place?" she asked, not looking up. He shrugged. "I did once. Right after my mother passed, thought about heading to Colorado maybe. I heard a man could start fresh there if he had the spine for it. And why didn't you? Because this land still had her in it. In the way the wind moves through the cottonwoods, in the way the porch boards creak at dusk. I couldn't stand the thought of never hearing those things again." She looked at him then, her cloth still in hand. "You loved her deeply," Osias nodded. "She raised me by herself after Pa died. Didn't know much about ranching, but she learned, taught me more about grit than any man ever could." Bridgette folded the cloth and set it aside. "My mother used to sing while she worked, the same hymn every morning. I never understood why until she was gone and the silence felt too wide." He held her gaze a moment, something unspoken passing between them like a shared ache. Then he stood, flexing his fingers. "Thanks for the patch up." She nodded once, then turned back to the stove to stir the stew pot. But the warmth that rose to her cheeks had nothing to do with the fire. That evening, the wind picked up. The barn creaked under its weight, and the lanterns flickered in the windows. After supper, Bridgette stepped outside with a shawl around her shoulders. She spotted Osias near the gate, whittling something small between his hands. "What is it?" she asked, crossing the yard. He held up a carved piece of pine, no bigger than her palm. "A bird, wings tucked, the shape clean and careful. For Ruth's boy," he said. She said he's been trying to catch a sparrow for days. She turned it over in her fingers. "It's beautiful." He looked off toward the hills. "I never carved before she passed, picked it up to keep my hands busy. Now it's just something I do when I can't sleep. You sleep poorly? I do better now." She handed the bird back. "I used to keep a journal, just scraps of paper and a bit of charcoal. Lost it on the train somewhere between Missouri and here. Maybe you should start a new one," she thought for a moment. "I might." He tucked the carving into his coat. "You've taken to this place quick. I had no other place to be. That's not what I mean." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You've made it better. The wind caught the edge of her shawl and she pressed it tighter. "You ever think of marrying again?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I've thought of it, but I never met the right woman, not until lately." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I don't need time to know what I want," he said. "I've lived long enough to tell the difference between comfort and something real." She reached out, brushing a fleck of wood shavings from his sleeve. "Then maybe it's time we both started again." He took her hand, rough fingers closing gently around hers. "If you'll have me." "I will," she whispered. Behind them, the lantern in the kitchen window glowed soft and steady. The wind kept on, but within its howl, there was something quieter, like a promise made beneath open sky, with no one watching but the stars. The wedding was held beneath the cottonwoods behind the house, where the grass grew tall and the creek ran slow, brown with silt and thick with dragonflies. Osias had built a small arbor from cedar branches the week before, and Ruth decorated it with prairie sage and the last of the summer daisies pulled from her garden. They didn't send for a preacher, mister. Haddock from the neighboring ranch was deputized and solemn enough to do the job, and Bridgette thought it fitting. She didn't need a church to know what was sacred. Afterward, there was coffee boiled in an iron pot and a pie Ruth had saved sugar all month to make. The men from the bunkhouse brought out a fiddle and played 2 slow songs before the light began to fade. Osias held her hand the whole time, his thumb brushing just once over her knuckles beneath the table. That night, inside the narrow bedroom that had never felt like hers until now, she unpinned her hair and set the comb gently on the washstand. Osias stood by the door, coat still on, like he didn't quite know how to move through this moment. "You can sit," she said. "You don't have to look like you're waiting for a storm to pass." He let out a breath that sounded more like a laugh. "I've never had something I didn't expect to lose." She turned toward him, fingers resting on the edge of the basin. "You won't lose me." He crossed the room slow, as if testing each step, and when he reached her, he didn't rush. His hands found her waist, warm and steady. "I don't know how to be a husband," he said. "I don't know how to be a wife," she replied. He leaned in, their foreheads brushing. "Then we'll learn together." Fall settled in. The trees along the river turned brittle gold, and smoke curled from the chimney most mornings before sunup. Bridgette took to the work like she'd been born to it, though her palms blistered twice before the skin toughened. She helped Ruth with the preserves, packed root vegetables in sawdust for the cellar, and stitched a wool lining into Osias's coat when the cold sharpened. One morning, she found him near the forge, hammering a new latch for the barn door. He paused when she approached, wiping the back of his hand across his brow. "I was thinking we might build a root house come spring," he said. "Dig it near the east slope. Would hold better than the cellar once the thaw comes." She nodded. "I'd like that." He set the hammer aside and looked at her. "I never expected to build anything with someone. You built that arbor," she said. "That was for you." Her breath caught, though she didn't show it. He added, "I want to build the rest of it for you too. Whatever comes next." That night, she wrote her first letter since arriving, inked in neat lines across a scrap of linen paper Osias had found in his father's desk drawer. She didn't write to anyone in particular, just herself, maybe, or to her mother, if heaven had a place for words. She wrote about the way Osias said her name when he was half asleep, the slow, quiet way he always touched her hand before taking it. She wrote about the frost that turned the fields into something glass-like and holy at dawn, and how she no longer felt like a guest in her own life. Later that week, Osias brought her to the far ridge where the land dropped into a narrow valley. He'd cleared a small patch there, marked it with 4 corner stones. "I want to build our house here," he said. "Away from the bunkhouse. I can plant alfalfa down below. Maybe keep a few goats." She knelt beside one of the stones, ran her fingers over the ridge worn into the granite. "It's quiet. That's why I chose it." They stood there a while, the wind pulling at her shawl, the sky stretched wide and pale above them. When he reached for her hand, she let him fold it into his without a word. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side. Osias taught her how to read the clouds for snow, how to split kindling without wasting the knots. She taught him how to mend socks without bunching the heel, how to make tea from wild mint that eased the ache in his shoulder when the weather turned. They didn't speak of love, not directly, but it was there, in the way he watched her stir the fire, in the way she rested her cheek against his chest after long days. One night, as sleet tapped against the windows and the fire burned low, she looked up from her sewing and said, "I never thought I'd feel safe like this." Osias was polishing a bridle, his hands moving slow. "You are," she set the fabric aside. "It's more than safety, though, it's belonging." He met her eyes. "That's what I want most for you. You've given it to me." They didn't speak again that night, but when they climbed into bed, her head tucked beneath his chin and his arm around her waist, they didn't need to. The silence held all the weight of the words they hadn't yet said. Outside, the wind pushed against the eaves, but inside, everything held. The first snow clung to the grass like ash, thin and wet, melting by mid-morning. Osias had risen before dawn to check the herd, but Bridgette stayed behind, kneading bread in the warm hush of the kitchen. Her sleeves were rolled just past her elbows, and her fingers moved with practiced rhythm along the floured board. The quiet suited her. The house had taken on a steadiness she hadn't known. She needed not just stillness, but a kind of quiet that grew from being known and not questioned. When the door opened and Osias stepped in, she didn't turn. She could tell from the way his boots scuffed the threshold that he was tired, not urgent. Still, she wiped her hands on a cloth and looked up. "You run into trouble." He unwound his scarf, shook his head. "Two calves caught in the north ditch. Took some rope and patience, but they're back with the others now." She poured him coffee, the strong kind he preferred, and handed it over without asking if he wanted it. He took it with his hands curled around the tin cup, eyes still half on the wind outside. "You'll need to build a better barrier come spring," she said. "I was thinking the same." She sat across from him, brushing a few crumbs from the table. "Your shoulder's starting to favor again. Notice that? You favor it when you lift the kettle." "Just a little." He took a sip, then set the cup down. "I've been meaning to ask you something." She waited. "There's a woman in town," he said. "Name's Mrs. Alcott, widow. She runs a one-room school behind the Mercantile. She's been trying to find someone to help her teach letters and numbers to the little ones." Bridgette sat back, uncertain. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. "After you, when I was picking up nails. Said she heard you were good with your hands. Figured maybe you were good with minds too." "I've never taught anyone," she said slowly. "You taught me how to boil eggs without cracking half of them," he said, "and how to hold a needle without bleeding. That's hardly. She needs someone who listens more than they speak." I told her I'd ask. Bridgette folded the cloth in her lap, smoothing it once. "You think I ought to? I think it's yours to decide." She didn't answer right away. She was used to the rhythm of the ranch, now the chores, the warmth of shared silence, the small victories of planting and mending. But a part of her missed words, missed the feeling of shaping them into something useful. "I'll walk into town next week," she said finally. "See what she has in mind." Osias nodded, satisfied. "That's good." Later, she stood by the window while he chopped wood beneath the bare cottonwood. His coat was patched along the elbow, and the swing of the axe was slower than it had been in September. Still, he didn't ask for help. Bridgette turned from the glass and reached for her sewing kit. That evening, as she stitched a new lining into his gloves, Osias pulled a folded paper from the side drawer of the desk. "I came across this in Pa's old things." She glanced up. "What is it?" "Deed to a parcel, not far from here, bordered by a stream." He was planning to expand before the winter he passed. She set her needle aside. "You want to keep it? I want to give it to you." She stared at him, not understanding. "We're building this life together," he said. "It ought to belong to both of us, not just by name." "By law." She bit the inside of her cheek, unsure how to hold the feeling that rose in her chest. "I've never owned land," she said. "Well," he said, placing the deed between them, "you do now." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "You sure?" "I've never been more certain." That night, the fire burned low, casting long shadows up the wall. She lay beside him, her head resting just below his collarbone, and listened to the steady thud of his heart. He didn't speak, but his hand moved slowly along her back. A quiet reassurance she no longer needed but still cherished. By morning, the snow had thickened, and the world outside their window was white and hushed. Inside, the warmth held. Come February, the wind blew meaner than before, cutting through layers like a blade honed too fine. The glass panes rattled in their frames. Inside the half-built house on the ridge, Osias nailed boards with slow precision, a wool scarf tucked beneath his collar. Bridgette stood nearby, rubbing wax into the hinges they'd salvaged from the old bunkhouse door. The low sun threw their shadows long across the snow-packed ground. He straightened and knocked snow from his hat brim. "You're quiet. I'm thinking about the stove," she said. "If we set it along the north wall, we'll need to run the pipe up and out beside the chimney. Otherwise, we'll lose too much heat." He nodded once, eyes flicking to the corner she meant. "You're right, I'll shift the framing come morning." She dusted her hands. "You ever think about what else we might build once this is done?" He leaned his weight on the hammer, considering. "Maybe a smokehouse and a root cellar like we talked about." She hesitated, then stepped closer, voice low. "I meant a family." He looked at her then, brows drawn. "You mean children, if it's something you'd want." The pause stretched, not from doubt but from the care he took in weighing things. "I never thought I'd have that," he said. "But if it's with you, I reckon I'd want nothing more." She swallowed once, then smiled, soft and certain. "Good." They finished the work in silence, but it wasn't a quiet born from distance. It was the kind that came from knowing the road ahead would be walked together, and that was enough. By early March, the first calf dropped in the lower pasture. Bridgette found it while checking fence lines, a small black thing curled beside its mother in the thawing mud. She crouched low, murmuring nonsense to calm them both, and when the cow didn't protest, she reached out and stroked the calf's damp flank. That night, Osias listened as she described the steam rising from the calf's back, the way the mother had nudged her arm once like she'd been accepted. He didn't interrupt, just sat beside her on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on her knee. "You belong here," he said quietly. "This life suits you." She leaned into his shoulder. "It's the first one that ever has." When the last frost broke, they moved into the new house. It was simple. 2 rooms and a lean-to for supplies, but the walls were thick, and the windows looked out over the valley where the cottonwoods would soon leaf green. Ruth brought over a crock of pear preserves and a scrap rug her sister had woven in Dakota territory. The bunkhouse men brought firewood and a jug of something strong, laughing loud and easy in the cool spring air. That night, Osias stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the last of them ride off. "You all right?" Bridgette asked, setting a lantern on the table. He nodded, slow. "Just didn't think I'd see this. A home that's mine with you in it." She crossed the room and took his hand. "It's ours." He turned to her, eyes clear and steady. "I love you." It was the first time he'd spoken it aloud. She didn't need to say it back. He already knew, but she did anyway. "I love you too." He kissed her then, not like someone reaching to claim, but like someone anchoring himself to the one place he'd never leave. They undressed without haste, hands learning what patience had already taught. The fire threw soft light across the quilt she'd made from leftover cloth, and the wind outside quieted until all that remained was their breath and the rustle of cotton as they moved close. Come summer, the school behind the mercantile needed a full-time teacher. Mrs. Alcott's arthritis had worsened, and when the town council offered Bridgette the position, she accepted. She walked the 2 miles into town on Mondays, her satchel filled with slates and a wrapped parcel of bread. On Fridays, Osias met her at the river bend, and they walked home together past the willow stands, talking about the calves or the new girl who'd finally learned her letters. Later that year, Bridgette held a folded letter in her hand, sent from a cousin in Virginia she'd thought long lost. The cousin wrote of a child grown near full, of war memories that lingered, of a wish to visit one day. Bridgette read it aloud to Osias beneath the cottonwood, his hand warm over hers on the bench he'd built from fallen limbs. "You want to write back?" he asked. "I do." "But not today." He didn't press, just leaned against her, and they watched the sun drop behind the ridge, the sky streaked orange and violet. By the following spring, the house had grown by 1 room and a cradle carved from pine. Osias built it in the long evenings, his hands sure despite the tremble that came when the weather turned. Bridgette lined it with soft cotton and tucked a sprig of lavender inside for scent. The baby came in May, with the lilacs just blooming. A girl, strong, lunged and dark-haired, her fist wrapped tight around Osias's pinky the moment she was laid between them. Ruth stayed 3 days to help, and when she left, Bridgette stood at the gate with her daughter in her arms and the wind lifting the hem of her dress. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered to Osias as they rocked on the porch that night, the baby asleep against her chest. "You gave it to yourself," he said, brushing her temple with the backs of his fingers. "You walked straight into it and never looked back." She turned to him, her voice low but certain. "I want to grow old with you here." "You will." He kissed her forehead, then the corner of her mouth. "We'll grow old slow, together." And they did. The years passed with the rhythm of seasons. Calves born, fields turned, letters sent and returned. Bridgette taught until her hair silvered. Osias built fences for neighbors and carved toys for the children that came after. Their daughter grew straight and strong, her laugh like water over stone. They stayed on that ridge, in the house they built with their own hands, where the wind softened over time and the quiet grew rich with memory. And when they sat side by side in the long evenings, their hands still touching after all those years, they knew they had chosen right. They had chosen love, and it had held,